Pathological gambling is going to be reclassified with DSM-5, and instead of being an impulse control disorder, is going to be basically an addiction in the same category as substance use disorders and other addictive behaviors. Okay? And this is based upon similarities that have been demonstrated in terms of tolerance and withdrawal, effects on the brain, genetic similarities. I think it's important for us to look at some of the differences between pathological gambling and the substance-related disorders. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that with substance use disorders, that one can blame the substance, and say, I was really wasted last night and I did such and such, And so there's a blaming of the drug. The gambler doesn't have that luxury, in a sense, and in fact, between gambling episodes, may be demonstrating irrational thinking and behavior, and may be in action, or may be still in a mindset that is similar to the gambling mindset. And I think because of this, the shame, the stigma may be greater. And can you say something about it and how it looks, how it feels from the point of view of the gambler?
Right. Well, both substance abusers and gamblers, one of the similarities happens to be denial. Mm-hmm. But I think the denial is much greater in gamblers. Even the drug addict or alcoholic that sort of blames the substance understands that it's the substance that created the problem. Mm-hmm. They tend to, in working with addicts, they almost are proud that they're addicts. In certain cases, they identify themselves as drug addicts. Either that or, again, blame, for those that are in denial, will still blame the substance. Generally in gamblers don't even understand that in most cases, until they come to a much later realization that they even have a gambling problem. They tend to believe that they more have financial problems and treat it much more as a financial situation. You'll hear many gamblers before in the preoccupation phase, pre-contemplation phase, is saying, I don't have a gambling problem, I have a financial problem. Mm-hmm. And again, that will create sort of, of that financial problem. They see the gambling more as a solution, as a way of getting back the money quicker. So they tend to create, much more serious financial problems. Again, that generally is the most common symptom that goes along with the pathological gambling, is severe money. Again, creating a lot of shame of having creditors call, not being able to answer the phone, avoiding people, and then the shame of society saying, hey, this person just can't handle his money when they're discovered.
Right. Yeah. And of course, one obvious difference is that the gambler can undo that problem by gambling, and one winning streak or one lucky bet, and they've erased their financial problem. The alcoholic or the drug addict might get a temporary relief by drinking or doing the drug, but they don't think that they're going to make their lives better or undo all their problems.
Yeah. No, I've never met a heroin addict that thought they were going to wake up out of a stupor with an extra $10,000 next to them.
Or undo all their medical problems.
Right.
Yeah. Related to this, the notion of a disease, of gambling as a disease, which I think that people in GA give lip service to, that it's a disease, it's an illness. It would seem, though, that it's so much easier for an alcoholic or a drug addict to embrace that idea, because they see the physical consequences, the hospitalizations, the life-threatening, problems, liver failure. How does the gambler view the gambling as an illness or a disease?
I think it's much more difficult, and especially through 12-step programs really don't go as much into the why, as more or less, and very successfully, they're there just to stop the behavior and then go through a recovery process. But the primary thing is to stop the gambling, so they don't look at it as much. There's not that psychoeducation, okay, it's a disease, and GA in its literature says gambling is an illness progressive in its nature, which can never be cured but can be arrested. But they don't give you the basics behind of what the illness is and what the components of the illness. You know, it's very easy to see substance abuse as something, you know, a chemical will create some other chemical reaction. Gamblers don't see that as a disease, and they don't understand the severity of it. You know, again, GA, I don't know if it's lip service, but it's part of, you know, they have their process of what their process is, and does call it an illness, but yet doesn't explain what that illness really is. And they use the word sometimes illness instead of the word, you know, sometimes they switch off between either illness or disease, and again, sometimes adds to further confusion.
It's interesting that AA, when it started, adopted a medical model based upon the idea of an allergy to alcohol, you know, and which legitimized the idea that it was an illness or disease. You'd think, or one might think, that gamblers and within GA would adopt or be quick to pay attention to the research that's been done showing the genetic basis for pathological gambling, the changes in the brain, the neuroimaging studies that are done, the neurotransmitters. To what degree has that occurred,
Well, we probably see, you know, AA, I believe, started in 1936, and it's still at that point there was a lot talked about. You know, there was a lot more research done on alcohol, even in the early you know, there was much more research at the time AA started. Gamblers Anonymous didn't start until 1957, which is 15 years before even compulsive gambling was talked about. So it's sort of, and GA used some of AA's literature, but did not include that in their early literature. You know, it's very difficult.
I'm sorry, did not include?
They did not include the allergy. They took certain little parts from the AA program, from the AA Big Book that talks about allergies, but they did not use any of that piece. You know, it's difficult to make changes now, and GA sort of has, it's in one of the passages that's read quite often in a meeting from GA's regular book that's read at meetings, there's actually a little paragraph that says, "Is knowing why we gambled important?" And again, GA says, perhaps, however, insofar as stopping gambling, many gamblers have benefited without the knowledge of why they gambled. So GA sort of almost, again, takes a really non-committal response. And for me, that's why I believe it's, you know, that that therapy, along with GA, could allow, you know, sort of gives that other piece of the puzzle, to gives that psychoeducation, and allows them to understand maybe a little bit more how the brain works or how the disease works and what the components of the disease are. Yeah.
There's some research supporting therapy and Gamblers Anonymous, but my experience from the very beginning was that they really complemented each other, and that the results of doing both are better than either by itself.
Right, and I think it's really important, you know, also sort of to go back maybe even to the first question is, Gamblers Anonymous gamblers, when they stop gambling, their brain comes back much quicker. And you know, all the bad cognitions come back right away. It's sort of not a, sometimes drug addicts and alcoholics in early recovery have to physically recover before they start thinking straight. Their thinking is slowed down. Sort of the gamblers, that situation doesn't happen. So there's a lot more rationalization among the gamblers, and can figure out how to talk themselves out of stopping.
You know, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that, but it would seem that what occurs is, I think there are changes in the brain that are slower you know, to normalize. And there's not a lot of longitudinal studies, you know, showing when and how that occurs. But I do think that a lot of the gamblers bounce back quickly, possibly or largely for the reason you mentioned, that they don't have the physical impairment that, you know, that they have to get their health back to the extent that, you know, somebody with a serious alcohol or drug problem does. But the fact that they bounce back is part of this all or nothing kind of grandiose, magical thinking that, okay, I'm ready to go, and that means going back to gambling, you know.
Right, because a lot of times when again, because of the denial, a lot of gamblers go into treatment because they're forced to go into treatment by, you know, eventually. And again, the family finds out generally much later than with drugs or alcohol, because one of the big differences is there's no physical symptoms. You can't smell blackjack on somebody's breath. So it's not discovered. It's not discovered until generally much later. Generally, drugs or alcohol will be discovered either by the family or their employer. But gamblers generally, it's when they run out of resources. Is when the family finds out. So and they might be forced, if they want to keep the family, to go in. So they still will come in. You know, a lot of people that come in to stop gambling do it because they just can't get any money anymore. And once they figure it out in a very short period of time, you know, they don't have to stop long enough that the money tends to come back. And again, a tremendous trigger for the gambler. They have much, you know, it's easy it's easier to stop the access to drugs and alcohol than it is to money.
And in fact, one of the ideas that's been put forward is that pathological gambling is more like an eating disorder than it is like alcohol or cocaine addiction, in that, you know, it's so much harder to have abstinence, and there is some notion of control because you do have to handle money. You do have a certain amount of uncertainty and risk in your daily life, and you need to learn how to manage those things rather than just avoiding them altogether.
Right. Yeah, no, money is the drug. That's what the gamblers turn into either their escape or to their action modes. They need money, and again, in that way, very similar.
The other thing related to that is all of the ways that the gambler can, you know, covertly gamble or still be in action, even though they're technically, you know, they're not going to the casino, but they can be procrastinating or betting on license plates or making mind bets or taking chances, not putting gas in the car, you know, all kinds of ways of subtly, you know, being in action. You know.
Right. Well, one of the criteria of the DSM-4 is tolerance, and it's sort of, there's a lot of other ways other than money to create the risks in terms of relationships. Again, especially procrastination, we see a lot of that. You know, we'll just keep waiting and waiting. We see, I've seen many diabetics come into GA and then, you know, gamble on their food safety by what they eat. But you did say something that I you know, you said that gambling was in a certain way very similar to an eating disorder as opposed to certain, like cocaine and other drugs. But then on the other side, there's that similarity part, whereas just as different drugs create sometimes different highs, you know, some people like the uppers and some people like the downers. You know, we see that sort of cocaine is also very similar to sort of what we call the action type gambling, that rush of somebody, you know, rolling the craps or whatnot and getting that power and the rush. And then we sort of have those people that, you know, sort of your heroin addicts or more your slot players who are almost on a, you know, on a heroin drip when they're over at the machines.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's interesting that it's hard to pin down in the literature, but clinically, the difference between the action seekers and the escape seekers, which Henry Lesieur described initially, is so useful clinically. You know.
Especially in treatment. It's going to be a different treatment.
Yeah.
But generally, even your action gamblers always tend to in the late stages, or there's some form of, sometimes it gets muddled because there always is some form of escape.
Well, the terminology is what hangs us up. All gamblers are gambling for escape,
Right.
Including the action gamblers. But in terms of the type of gambling, the style, the personality, the referring to it as action and escape make
Right, and maybe it's just like uppers and downers.
Sense, yeah.
Yeah, which that they have no problem using those terminology. And
going back to the difference with the substance users, the unpredictability of the gambling is something that is a really obvious difference. If you're an alcoholic, you know when you drink whatever it is you drink, what the effect is going to be. You know how long it's going to last. You know how many drinks you may need to stay in whatever state you want or need to be in. When you're gambling, you don't know if you're going to lose your money in the first minute or if you're going to, win and be gambling continuously for 2 weeks or what's going to happen. And it's such an unpredictable experience. And can you maybe say something about how that affects?
Yeah, well, I think it's really what reinforces gamblers to be addicted or have a dependency on almost, I think even more, is the way I understand conditioning. A drug addict or alcoholic, they pretty much know what the high is going to be. It's just a matter of what the intensity is. They're always going to get basically the same reward every time they take the same drug, unless. Yeah. But the gambler, because of that intermittent reward, of the fact is, I think that tends to be a much greater conditioning part is we don't know, the gamblers do not know when they're going to get the reward, and it's the expectation. I think it's sometimes more, it's not the bet itself, it's waiting for the bet. It's sometimes, gamblers will go, especially in the later stages in pathological gambling, they're more afraid of losing than winning. They get more off on the fact is if I lose this bet, I am going to be really in a lot of trouble. And almost that's the bet as opposed to earlier on in their gambling, maybe when they were in a winning phase, that, hey, I'm going to win, I'm going to do all this stuff with it. Sort of later on, it's about not losing and just be able to keep themselves in the action.
I'm reminded, I know you have an interest in gambling films. There's this film, King of the Bingo Game, from a Ralph Ellison short story. And, I haven't seen it in a while, but it has to do with this man who goes to a movie theater and is part of the entertainment. This is during the Depression, I guess. They have a wheel that you spin, and he gets selected, and I think he wins initially. And he gets caught up in it. This guy who didn't have a gambling problem, hadn't gambled before, and so he gets to spin for the big jackpot. And he can't let go of the wheel. He has to keep it going and going and going and going. And it ends with, he just, you never find out, what happened. I think they remove him from the theater, but he won't stop that mindset of anticipation and of not knowing that he lost, and just focusing on that incredible anticipation.
Right. No, it's almost like sort of, and I speak a lot with, I've worked also with drug addicts. It's sometimes a lot of that anticipation is about copying the, of making the call, getting the dealer on the phone. Yeah. Well, it's very similar, in that way it's almost very similar. For the gambler, most of that is driving to the racetrack, driving to the casino, the anticipation of having the money in their hand, or the preoccupation of handicapping and knowing that tomorrow is going to be the big day, and almost loss of sleep and that anticipation. But also I think, some people, and I've worked with a lot of gamblers and I've known for many years, I've heard many thousands of stories about gamblers, Some people, I think, based on their pathways, some people, it takes a while for that gambling problem to develop. And some people, it's just the minute they grab that wheel, this is it.
Yeah. But you're talking about the preoccupation, and I'm reminded that that not only that it's that anticipation, and that some gamblers will say that the actual gambling is the least important part of it, and that the handicapping is what they really, get off on, or others who get so caught up in the scams and schemes for getting money that becomes the addiction,
the rush,
the rush, how they're going to get the money, not the going to the casino or the card club, which becomes really, really secondary.
And generally, those people are going to be much harder to treat. Because you can get them to stop gambling, but that rush part of the money, of the scams, again, it's hard to get them out of that. Is to deal with that almost as a primary. That might trump the gambling after a point.
The one thing about the unpredictability that that we were talking about, and I don't know if it is the conditioned response, which seems to be more for the slot machine player, where we get an immediate, you're going to win or you're going to lose. But for someone where the unpredictability might be, they might win over a period of weeks or longer, that ultimately the control issues are so much more important. That there's shame about being out of control, and that the need for control, is so important, because you're dealing with an uncontrollable, unpredictable, behavior or activity that you're involved in. So the superstition gets tremendously problematic. Some gamblers will be watching a football game on television, and they've got, the remote is here, and all their icons or idols or whatever, and nobody can talk, and what they're wearing, and it's just multiplied and generalized tremendously in terms of all the things they're doing to control something that basically they don't have control of.
Yes, that gamblers tend to have magical thinking. You don't want to get between a gambler and the TV screen. You walk by, the other team scores a touchdown. It's your fault that happened.
So these are some of the differences between the gamblers and the substance users. I think fantasy is much more important with the behavioral addiction.
Well, it's that dream world.
And the dream world and the compensatory fantasies, the spectacular success, the grandiosity, all the things you're going to do with the money, the being powerful, strangely being in control, that omnipotent sense of control when you're actually most out of control. And that, so dealing with that psychologically is much more important than I think it is for the substance-related.
There tends to be a lot more irrational cognitions for gamblers, because they always have that illusion that they could win. But one difference that also I'd like to talk about that I think is really important is the fact that there's no saturation point for gamblers.
That's a good point.
And I think it's really significant to say you can only drink so much in a day. You can't wipe yourself out, you can't wipe the family out in one afternoon because you're going to either pass out or die at a certain point. But gamblers can lose incredible amounts of money in a short period of time, creating much more financial problems and much more immediate problems.
And I think that pertains also to the therapist's tolerance for slips. There are some behaviors where if the person slips, you deal with it, and there are others where a slip is life-threatening,
Right. No, and sometimes they get scared about harm reduction in gambling, especially from the family perspective. Is that a slip you could lose your house.
I mean, I'm not minimizing it for the alcoholic. Certainly, if someone's going to, or the drug addict, if they're going to drive while they're under the influence, that's something to really be concerned about. But you frequently see with gamblers, with severe, gamblers, that they're going to rob a bank, or they're going to get themselves killed, or they're going to, lose something that, their family or their career or something that they are not going to be able to undo or get back. Anything that we didn't touch on that in terms of the differences one sees, clinical differences, or how it would affect therapy?
Yeah, I think one part is accountability, because gamblers tend to be great charmers, great liars. They'll, I get fooled still often because they know exactly what to say. And again, because they're not under the influence, they're not staggering. They know how to get, their goal is to get money. And the problem is you have sort of accountability with drug testing for substance abuse. So you can come in there and test them. Are you still gambling? I mean, are you still drinking, or are you still using? But gambling there's no test for gambling, so it sort of takes away some of the accountability.
Yeah, this is certainly an issue for the family, for the spouse, where, the wife of a gambler is going to hold on to her anger a lot longer, because it protects her, and she can't tell whether he's gambling or not, so the trust issue and the amount of damage that he can do is so great that the anger is a protective device, and gamblers frequently don't understand that, and they say, "What's she angry at? Whatever. I stopped gambling. I've been gambled all week."
And that's why a lot of times, because of that anger, you don't see as many family members going into treatment. They think it's, again, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about, the differences, they think they have a problem. It's their problem, or they're just so angry they don't want to, invest any more time with the gambler. But I'm guessing, though, sometimes, when you're seeing somebody once a week, they can get over pretty easy. I'm really guessing through some education that the family member could just see that look, maybe, and they always, or they generally do, again, with that anger, think they see that look again. It's very important when I'm working with gamblers early on in recovery, is for them to be very accountable to their families in terms of, if you say you're going to be somewhere at a certain time, to be there or make that phone call, because it's like you said, they're hanging in, they're almost expecting the relapse, and are very hypersensitive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenthal.